The common assumption suggests that psychological fortitude manifests during periods of serenity and predictable ease, yet this perspective is fundamentally flawed. True cognitive resilience only surfaces within those unforeseen intervals where preparation is absent, when intense strain arrives without notice, and when visceral sentiments surge more rapidly than rational thought. We frequently encounter circumstances where the impulse to act impulsively overrides the capacity for quiet reflection, revealing a harsh reality that many choose to ignore. Unless an individual masters the governance of their internal landscape, every external event will dictate their trajectory, a result not of inherent fragility but of a profound lack of intentional conditioning. Modern society frequently validates volatile responses, elevating distress, alarm, and excessive rumination, while encouraging individuals to broadcast every fleeting sentiment and allow raw emotions to steer their life choices. Consequently, many find themselves trapped in a cycle of fatigue and instability, wondering why their daily existence feels so fundamentally turbulent. Resilience must never be confused with fleeting motivation, as the latter evaporates the moment external circumstances lose their luster. Genuine mental strength is the practiced capacity to maintain equilibrium even when the environment is hostile and the odds are unfavorable. It is the refined craft of preserving composure when the subconscious mind leans toward hysteria, maintaining lucidity while emotions attempt to seize command of the intellect, and upholding rigor when the allure of ease threatens to eclipse the necessity of growth. This discourse is not intended to provide a temporary emotional lift or a brief sense of encouragement. Rather, it serves as a rigorous workshop for the psyche. Intellectual power is not an inherent trait granted at birth but is a structure meticulously assembled through consistent effort and repeated exposure to demanding challenges. A significant portion of society maintains a facade of strength only while life remains predictable and kind, yet they lose their internal compass at the first sign of friction. They engage in conflict, surrender to their impulses, and allow their personal agency to be absorbed by their surroundings, other people, or the very feelings they never mastered. However, the development of internal toughness completely alters this power structure, ensuring that events no longer dictate your identity or your peace. Under this new paradigm, pressure is transformed into something that can be navigated, and setbacks are viewed as valuable data rather than personal indictments. To possess this level of strength means you can inhabit a space of unease without seeking an immediate escape, absorb critique without personal collapse, and acknowledge the presence of fear without allowing it to dictate the direction of your next step. The goal here is not to cultivate a cold or detached persona, but to become a pillar of stability and clarity that remains unperturbed by the storm. Without the ability to govern one's own internal reactions, no tactical plan can succeed and no achievement can be sustained over the long term. Reflect upon the instances that resulted in the greatest personal costs. Usually, the damage was not caused by the event itself, but by the immediate, unrefined reaction to it. It is found in the sharp words uttered in a moment of fury, the choices fueled by sudden dread, or the paths left untaken because uncertainty was allowed to govern the spirit. Resilience is the vital barrier that exists between a sudden urge and a final action, creating a deliberate pause that empowers you to select a response rather than simply reacting, and that specific pause is a skill that can be sharpened. Throughout the following hour, you will be guided in the construction of that internal space through concrete psychological exercises rather than mere abstract philosophy. This is a practical preparation for the moments that truly define a life, when plans fail, when the weight of expectation is heavy, and when you are physically or emotionally drained. You will discover the methods for staying poised under duress, confronting discomfort directly, and maintaining logical thought patterns when your pulse quickens. The focus will be on recovering from hardship without losing your resolve, detaching from the need for external validation, and staying concentrated while the world around you descends into disarray. Each segment is specifically engineered to fortify a different pillar of your psychological foundation, including impulse regulation, emotional persistence, and clarity during high-stakes encounters. The objective is not to increase your workload but to become an individual who is significantly more difficult to unsettle. Life does not offer guarantees of becoming simpler, nor do external events become more predictable or people more empathetic. However, your capacity for endurance can be vastly expanded. You can condition your mind to process immense pressure without breaking, to meet adversity without retreating, and to advance even when the path ahead is fraught with irritation. This form of inner power is not performative or loud. It manifests quietly in the manner in which you answer challenges, the wisdom of your choices, and the dignity you maintain when your expectations are not met. By remaining engaged with this training and integrating these principles into your daily life, you will witness a fundamental shift in your perception. The speed of your reactions will diminish, replaced by a more deliberate and clear-sighted way of thinking, leading to a deeper sense of self-trust when the stakes are high. Eventually, the very scenarios that once triggered a sense of being overwhelmed will feel entirely within your control, not because the world changed, but because your internal capacity grew. You do not require a feeling of readiness to embark on this journey, nor do you need a spark of inspiration. You simply require a dedicated commitment to the process. This is the starting point of true mastery, not in a state of comfort, but in the conscious choice to prepare your mind before the world demands it of you. We shall commence with the first chapter, which focuses on the primary mastery of your initial response. Every challenge you face impacts you in two distinct phases, first as a tangible event, and second as a psychological reaction. Most people mistakenly believe that the external event is the source of their pain, yet the true damage to one's progress, connections, and self-assurance stems from the subsequent reaction. Whether it is a harsh remark from another, a failed endeavor, or the sudden arrival of unforeseen stress, the body often responds with tension or defensiveness before the intellect can intervene. In that frantic state, words are spoken too quickly, choices are made in haste, and vital energy is squandered on a reaction that serves no productive purpose. This fundamental shift in perspective marks the true genesis of psychological resilience, which is found not in altering external circumstances, but in governing the internal landscape of the self. The initial response dictates the ultimate trajectory of any encounter. To respond with raw emotion is to relinquish personal agency, whereas to implement a deliberate pause is to reclaim it. Unfortunately, a vast majority of individuals never utilize this pause, as they have been conditioned by a digital world to favor immediate feedback. In an era where electronic messages demand instant replies and any hint of discomfort triggers a retreat, the reactive mind operates on a subconscious autopilot that perpetually reinforces outdated behaviors. If you reflect on your past regrets, you will find they rarely stem from a place of calculated reasoning. Rather, they are the offspring of hasty impulses, the heated argument that spiraled out of bounds, the prospect ruined by sheer restlessness, or the critical error committed under the weight of expectation. The essence of mental fortitude lies in the capacity to disrupt these automated cycles. Mastering your reaction is not synonymous with the suppression of your humanity or the stifling of your feelings. It simply means that you refuse to let those feelings act as the primary driver of your conduct. You are permitted to experience the heat of anger without allowing it to manifest in your actions, to acknowledge the chill of fear without obeying its demands, and to feel the weight of stress without letting it dictate your final choices. A resilient mind experiences the full spectrum of human emotion but steadfastly refuses to surrender the steering wheel to those fleeting states. The undeniable reality remains that if an external entity can dictate your reaction, they effectively possess you. When a single remark can derail your mood or a minor delay can spark a fire of frustration, you are not exhibiting passion. You are displaying a profound vulnerability that is merely masquerading as emotion. This internal governance begins with the pause, which is far from a passive state of inaction. It is a form of vigorous, active discipline. It represents the precise moment you halt the automatic reflex and generate the necessary room to make a conscious selection. Even a single second of stillness is transformative, as it provides the narrow window required for logic to resurface, for the heart rate to stabilize, and for a broader perspective to enter the frame. Without this brief interruption, your behavior becomes entirely predictable, and predictability in a chaotic world is a form of structural weakness. The environment will never stop providing triggers. It will always present you with unreasonable individuals, sudden complications, and high-pressure scenarios. While you cannot scrub these triggers from your life, you can absolutely refine the way you answer them. Developing this level of awareness is the primary objective of this specific training phase. Most instinctive reactions occur before they even register in our conscious awareness, making it vital to identify the physical signatures of rising emotion. Whether it is a tightening in the chest, a quickening pulse, or a desperate urge to defend your position and explain your side, these sensations must be treated as signals rather than commands. The moment you identify these indicators, you must pause, not to engage in deep philosophical analysis, but simply to break the circuit of the habit. A single, controlled breath through the nose followed by a slow release creates a biological boundary. This simple act of respiration serves as a vital partition between the external stimulus and your eventual response. Furthermore, it is essential to identify the internal state without adding a narrative of blame or a complex backstory. Simply acknowledging that this is frustration or this is apprehension creates a necessary psychological distance that restores your sense of command. Once that distance is established, pose a pragmatic question to yourself regarding the immediate consequences of an impulsive reaction. In most instances, the projection is clear: an emotional outburst leads to more damage, deeper regret, and further unnecessary friction. This inquiry is designed to remind you that every reaction carries a long-term cost. Following this realization, you can then select a response that upholds your dignity and preserves your control, whether that involves maintaining silence, offering a measured statement, or simply choosing to walk away until the atmosphere cools. It is often the quietest responses that carry the most significant weight, for there is no requirement to win every minor exchange when your goal is to remain the master of yourself. Regulating your initial response does not imply a lack of power. Instead, it makes you unpredictable in a highly effective manner. Most people expect an emotional spike or a loss of composure when tension rises, and when you refuse to provide that reaction, the balance of power shifts in your favor. Your stillness serves to expose the impulsiveness of the chaos surrounding you, commanding a level of respect that requires no verbal demand. This composure is a silent declaration of strength that unsettles those who rely on conflict to feel powerful. Acquiring this skill is a matter of consistent repetition rather than sudden revelation. In the early stages, you may only realize you have reacted after the event has passed, yet even this retrospective awareness constitutes a form of progress. Eventually, you will begin to catch yourself in the midst of a reaction, which signals significant growth. The ultimate goal is to identify the impulse before it manifests, which is the hallmark of true mental resilience. You must approach this training through minor daily occurrences. When a trivial annoyance strikes, choose to pause and remain silent for a mere 3 seconds. Such an exercise may not seem impressive or dramatic, but it is through these small interruptions of old habits that the architecture of a strong mind is built. When you prioritize the mastery of your reaction, every subsequent challenge becomes far more manageable. It is impossible to think with clarity while in the throes of a reaction, just as it is impossible to lead others or build genuine self-confidence while your internal state is in disarray. Reactive behavior is the primary adversary of mental lucidity, whereas the pause is the definitive gateway to enduring strength. By mastering this single discipline, you take the most critical step toward navigating any life situation without ever losing your sense of self. The second chapter examines the necessity of maintaining composure during periods of high intensity, positing that it is not the weight of the burden that breaks an individual, but rather a deficiency in internal regulation. While many perceive external pressure as a force to be evaded, leading them to procrastinate or mentally withdraw, the reality is that pressure itself is a neutral catalyst. It simply unmasks the existing architecture of your psyche. If your internal state is fragmented, the added strain will amplify that disorder, whereas a disciplined mind uses that same force to hone its concentration. Achieving a state of tranquility does not imply the total removal of external stressors. Instead, it represents the maintenance of command while those stressors are present. Those who exhibit true stability do not do so because their path is unobstructed, but because they have rigorously conditioned themselves to remain unwavering when the path becomes treacherous. When tension escalates, the biological response is to accelerate every internal process. The pulse quickens, thoughts become erratic, and the field of vision narrows. In these critical moments, failures are rarely the result of a lack of intellect. They are almost always the byproduct of an artificial sense of urgency. This haste leads to impulsiveness, which in turn breeds errors that carry long-term repercussions. It is vital to recognize that staying poised under duress is not an inherent personality trait, but a functional skill that must be rehearsed. The disparity between the individual who succumbs to panic and the one who remains steadfast lies in their internal regulation. Pressure possesses only the power that your subjective interpretation grants it. Because the physical body registers strain before the conscious mind can process it, the quest for composure must begin with physiology rather than abstract thought. When the body exhibits signs of tension, such as elevated shoulders, constricted breathing, or a clenched jaw, it is impossible to think oneself into a state of peace. The mind follows the lead of the body. Therefore, the breath serves as the primary tool for restoration. By deliberately slowing your respiration, you transmit a signal of safety to the nervous system, effectively informing the brain that there is no immediate existential threat. Only after the body has been physically calmed can the intellect regain the clarity required to formulate a strategy. When you find yourself under significant strain, the immediate priority should be the intentional regulation of your breath. Engaging in a pattern of inhaling through the nose for 4 seconds and exhaling through the mouth for 6 seconds is essential, as the extended exhalation serves to deactivate the fight or flight response. This practice is not intended to produce a state of total relaxation, but rather to establish a baseline of stability. Once stability is achieved, you can then move toward finding practical solutions. Furthermore, it is necessary to consciously decelerate your physical movements. The impulse to move, speak, and decide rapidly is where mistakes are most likely to aggregate. Slow, deliberate actions project an aura of authority and prevent the mind from spiraling into disorder. Furthermore, it is crucial to narrow your cognitive focus during these high-stakes moments. Most people become overwhelmed because they attempt to address every potential complication simultaneously, which saturates the brain's processing capacity. Those who master pressure do so by isolating a single objective and asking themselves what specific action is most pertinent in the current moment. They disregard past failures and future anxieties to focus exclusively on the next correct move. This reduction of complexity causes the sensation of pressure to shrink. True composure is not a state of paralysis. It is a state of precision where every choice is made with deliberate intent. There is a common misconception that being loud, defensive, or aggressive under pressure is a sign of strength. However, these behaviors are typically indicators of internal disintegration. True poise is inherently quiet and does not require external validation or performative displays. Individuals who maintain their equilibrium create a distinct psychological advantage over those around them. While others become reactive and prone to errors, the calm individual is able to perceive a variety of options that remain invisible to the frantic mind. In this sense, composure is a strategic asset. It empowers you to think with a level of lucidity that others lack, allowing you to act decisively while others are frozen by their own emotions. This enables a form of leadership that relies on steady competence rather than brute force. True composure must be forged in the absence of crisis. It is impossible to master the art of the storm while the ship is already sinking. One must engage in the deliberate rehearsal of internal regulation long before the stakes are high. This is achieved by intentionally seeking out minor, controlled stressors in daily life. Whether through the biting chill of a cold shower, the tension of a difficult conversation, or the artificial urgency of a tight deadline. The objective is not to induce suffering, but to educate the body that a state of unease does not equate to a state of peril. Furthermore, practicing the 10-second delay when external pressure demands an immediate reply serves to atrophy the impulse toward reactive behavior, thereby fortifying the muscle of self-discipline. Maintaining stability under duress also necessitates a fundamental detachment from the obsession with final outcomes. Panic is often the byproduct of fixating on results that remain outside of one's immediate control, such as the fear of professional failure or the dread of social judgment. Conversely, those who remain steady concentrate exclusively on execution. They pour their energy into effort and attention, while releasing the rest to the winds of chance. Pressure thrives on the anxiety of imagined futures, whereas tranquility is found only in the precision of the present action. It is a vital distinction to remember that being calm does not mean you are devoid of sensation. Your pulse may quicken and your senses may sharpen, but the goal is to prevent these physiological markers from distorting your rational conduct. By preserving your composure under pressure, you effectively husband your cognitive energy and bypass the drain of unnecessary friction. Over time, the very situations that once felt intimidating lose their power, not because the world has become a gentler place, but because you have developed a core that refuses to collapse. When you train for stillness deliberately and consistently, you become the point of equilibrium in an environment where others are unraveling. This is the practical application of mental fortitude, staying the course when the conditions are at their most volatile. The third chapter addresses the necessity of daily discomfort, challenging the widespread fallacy that unease is a warning of impending harm. Many view discomfort as a signal to retreat, yet this belief is the silent architect of mental fragility. In reality, discomfort is a training stimulus. Every time you flee from a difficult sensation, you reinforce the subconscious idea that challenge is synonymous with danger. Once the mind adopts this narrative, it will instinctively steer you toward a life of caution and dependency on the familiar. Resilience is built through the opposite approach. Strong minds do not wait for the environment to become comfortable. They intentionally move toward the edges of their tolerance. A candid examination of daily habits often reveals a persistent flight from the present moment. We reach for digital distractions to avoid silence, postpone demanding responsibilities until they become crises, and seek entertainment the moment boredom strikes. These are not merely personality quirks. They are forms of conditioning that teach the brain to expect constant ease. When that ease is interrupted, the body responds with restlessness, tension, and a desperate urge to procrastinate. This specific moment of resistance is the crucible where mental strength is either forged or forfeited. The majority of individuals choose to retreat during these moments, engaging in a silent negotiation with themselves to delay the work until the perfect mood arrives. Each time you succumb to that internal dialogue, you validate your own weakness. Discomfort is the essential currency required for growth, and the avoidance of it is the primary driver of stagnation. Mental capacity expands much like physical muscle. It requires resistance to trigger adaptation. The fundamental issue is rarely that life is too difficult, but rather that your nervous system has become unaccustomed to the sensation of struggle. It mistakenly interprets a challenge as a lethal threat. Consistent training re-educates the nervous system, teaching it a new, empowering truth. This sensation is safe, this feeling is temporary, and I am capable of remaining right here. This internal shift transforms the entire landscape of your self-discipline. It begins by fundamentally redefining the nature of unease. Discomfort is not an indicator of harm. Rather, it is the sensation of unfamiliar effort, the friction of deep concentration, the weight of rigorous discipline, and the resistance encountered when performing a task that lacks immediate appeal. These feelings are not adversaries to be defeated but are the very signals that psychological conditioning is taking place. Resilient minds cease asking, "How do I feel?" and instead prioritize the question, "What must be accomplished?" By shifting from an emotional lens to a practical one, you eliminate the internal negotiation that leads to stagnation. The mind is a master of debate, constantly offering justifications for delay or excuses to quit, but its power evaporates the moment you stop arguing and start executing. Training for discomfort is a process that flourishes through consistency rather than extreme intensity. You do not require monumental challenges to begin. You simply need to honor your commitments when your initial enthusiasm wanes. This might manifest as finishing a project after your motivation has dissipated, choosing to sit in quiet reflection rather than reaching for digital stimulation, or completing a physical workout when your energy is depleted. While these actions may appear insignificant in isolation, they compound over time. Each instance in which you remain present with discomfort instead of seeking an escape increases your psychological threshold, transforming what once felt overwhelming into a manageable routine. Furthermore, this practice cultivates emotional endurance, which is far more valuable than short-lived bursts of intensity. Many individuals start with great fervor only to collapse the moment the weight of discomfort accumulates. In contrast, those who possess mental strength rely on steady persistence, accepting unease as an inherent part of the journey without adding unnecessary drama to the experience. It is also vital that this discomfort be intentional. While life will invariably provide random stressors, true training involves choosing difficulty before it is forced upon you. Whether through early mornings, focused work without distraction, or the practice of delayed gratification, these controlled stresses build a sense of agency that fortifies your confidence. When you deliberately choose the difficult path, you send a powerful message to your subconscious. You are the architect of your own environment, not a victim of circumstance. There will inevitably be days when the resistance feels particularly heavy, marked by fatigue, doubt, or a desire to retreat. These are precisely the moments where the most profound transformation occurs. Training when you feel capable is simple. Training when you feel resistant is what shifts your identity. You cease to be someone who requires ideal conditions to function and become someone who advances regardless of the environment. Eventually, discomfort loses its ability to intimidate. It becomes a recognizable signal, a familiar sensation that, while not necessarily pleasant, no longer dictates your behavior. You begin to notice that you recover more rapidly from setbacks and remain functional under high-stakes pressure, not because of a change in your nature, but because of the rigor of your training. Mental fortitude is not the absence of unease. It is the refusal to let that unease govern your actions. You acknowledge the feeling, you inhabit the space, and you move forward anyway. This discipline is not an act of self-harshness, but an act of radical honesty regarding what growth requires. Friction is the prerequisite for development, whereas the constant pursuit of ease creates a fragile psyche. By training for discomfort daily, you construct a mind that remains upright when the world becomes heavy, a mind that can navigate pressure, maintain composure, and advance when others choose to retreat. The fourth chapter explores the necessity of maintaining clarity when emotional tides rise. It is a biological reality that emotions surface more rapidly than rational thought. Before logic can even find its voice, a visceral reaction has already taken hold. The chest tightens, the mind becomes flooded with narratives of blame or fear, and a false sense of urgency replaces patient reflection. Most individuals mistakenly believe that the emotion itself is the enemy, leading them to suppress or deny their feelings. However, this avoidance only serves to amplify the internal pressure, making a calm response even more difficult to achieve. The true measure of cognitive fortitude is not the eradication of feeling, but the preservation of clarity while those feelings are present. It is a biological certainty that you will encounter emotional surges throughout your life. However, you possess the power to determine whether those impulses dictate your choices. Every surge of emotion carries a distinct internal energy that, if left unmanaged, will inevitably distort your logic. Whereas a fragile mind is a servant to its moods, a resilient one acts as an objective observer, utilizing discipline to direct that energy rather than being consumed by it. The very instant an emotion intensifies, your objective perception is compromised. Anger serves to narrow your field of vision, fear tends to amplify perceived threats, and even extreme excitement can blind you to potential risks. These states do not offer a complete version of the truth. They merely highlight a single, fractured aspect of reality while obscuring the rest. To think with lucidity under these conditions requires the essential skill of separation. You must decouple what you feel from what you eventually do. Most people fail here because they fuse emotion and action into a single, reflexive moment. They feel resentment, so they lash out. They feel apprehension, so they retreat. High-level thinkers, however, insert a deliberate pause. This begins with simple internal recognition. By naming the state, stating, "This is frustration," or "This is anxiety," you strip the emotion of its invisibility. Naming a feeling does not instantly solve the conflict, but it decelerates the momentum of the impulse, thereby restoring your capacity for choice. Furthermore, once you have identified the emotion, you must resist the urge to provide a complex explanation for it. Explanations quickly morph into justifications, which lead to irrational actions. Instead, transition to a stabilizing inquiry. What is this specific feeling pushing me to do? Recognizing that anger demands an attack or that fear demands an escape allows you to see the impulse for what it is, a suggestion, not a command. Follow this with a second, pragmatic question. If I surrender to this urge right now, what will the ultimate cost be? This is the point where rational clarity returns. Emotions function as powerful internal advisors, but they are notoriously poor decision makers. Thinking clearly means acknowledging their input while refusing to let them take the steering wheel. A frequent error in judgment occurs when individuals attempt to resolve complex issues while they are still emotionally charged. They engage in heated debates while furious or make life-altering commitments while overwhelmed. This is a form of psychological sabotage. When internal tides are high, your priority must shift from resolution to regulation. You do not need to solve the external problem in that exact second. You first need to stabilize your internal environment. Regulation is a physical process. You must ground yourself by consciously relaxing your jaw, lowering your shoulders, and slowing your respiration. These physical cues signal safety to the brain, allowing the reasoning centers of the mind to regain access to the situation. Maintaining clarity also involves a vigorous resistance to the urge to personalize every event. Emotions are master storytellers, often weaving narratives that suggest, "This is a personal attack," or "This always happens to me." While these stories feel profoundly convincing in the heat of the moment, they are rarely accurate. A strong mind challenges these narratives not through aggressive internal arguing, but through gentle, evidence-based questioning. Ask yourself what facts you actually possess and what other interpretations might be equally true. This practice expands your perception, moving you from the narrow focus of survival toward a broader focus of understanding. Another pillar of this discipline is the strategic use of the delayed response. You are under no obligation to provide an immediate reaction to every emotional trigger. Often, silence is the most articulate response, and a tactical delay is the wisest move. Waiting is not a sign of hesitation, it is a display of immense self-control. Time naturally erodes the intensity of an emotion, making what feels like a crisis now appear manageable only a few hours later. Additionally, one must recognize that many reactions are merely recycled patterns from the past, unresolved fears or old resentments hijacking the present moment. When a reaction feels disproportionate to the current event, it usually is. Clarity improves the moment you recognize these cycles, allowing you to treat the surge as a familiar pattern rather than a unique, urgent emergency. Furthermore, clear thinking necessitates a profound sense of responsibility, not for the initial surge of emotion, but for the conduct that follows. You are not the architect of every feeling that arises, yet you are the absolute authority over what you do next. This distinction is inherently liberating. It removes the weight of guilt for having human reactions while reinforcing a strict accountability for your actions. Those who think with lucidity do not engage in self-shame for their internal states. Instead, they focus their discipline on their response. Over time, this consistency fosters a deep internal trust. You begin to rely on your own stability under pressure, knowing that you will not emotionally self-destruct, but will instead pause, evaluate, and choose. This self-trust eventually radiates outward as an aura of reliability that commands respect from others. The final discipline of emotional clarity is rooted in consistent practice, as perfect composure cannot be expected in high-stakes moments without daily rehearsal. You must cultivate clarity during minor frustrations, small disappointments, and everyday irritations. By repeatedly pausing, naming the feeling, and choosing a breath over a reaction, you build the neural pathways required for resilience. Eventually, when major emotional storms arrive, the established pattern of stability holds firm. Thinking clearly is not about becoming a detached or cold individual. It is about becoming a reliable person, reliable in your decisions, reliable to yourself, and reliable under the most intense pressure. While emotions will always surface as a part of the human experience, your training determines whether you rise above them or are pulled beneath the tide. Chapter 5: Navigating Failure Without Internal Collapse. The fifth chapter explores the capacity to handle failure without breaking, positing that a setback is not the conclusion of progress, but the ultimate test of psychological fortitude. Most individuals do not fail due to a lack of inherent talent. Rather, they fail because they suffer an internal collapse the moment an endeavor goes awry. When a plan disintegrates, a mistake is highlighted, or an effort yields no results, the common reflex is to internalize the event. People begin to identify with the setback, allowing it to define their self-worth and dictate their future. This is precisely where momentum is lost. Failure, in its purest form, is neutral. What truly breaks an individual is the negative meaning they choose to attach to the experience. Fragile minds interpret failure as definitive proof of inadequacy, as a sign that they are fundamentally incapable or not destined for success. Conversely, resilient minds view failure as vital information regarding timing, strategy, and preparation. This shift is not a product of blind optimism, but of a calculated reinterpretation of reality. When a setback occurs, the primary danger is the subsequent emotional overload, the surge of shame, frustration, and self-doubt. While these feelings are natural, they will distort your reasoning if left unchecked. Mental strength begins with the radical separation of the event from your identity. You may have failed at a specific task, but you are not a failure as a person. This distinction, though simple in theory, is rarely practiced, yet it is essential for preserving your energy and clarity. Handling failure without breaking requires the primary discipline of containment. You must ensure that the setback does not contaminate other areas of your life. Strong minds refuse to let a single defeat define their entire narrative. They actively limit the damage. Instead of declaring that everything is ruined, they specify that this particular approach did not work. This nuance in language is critical, as words shape your perception, and perception governs your eventual response. The second necessary discipline is the use of strategic delay. You must refuse to evaluate your worth or make long-term conclusions while the sting of disappointment is still fresh. Failure demands a period of distance before a productive analysis can begin. Once you have stabilized, you can move away from unproductive questions like, "What is wrong with me?" and toward functional inquiries. "What specific variable did I miss?" Or, "What assumptions proved incorrect?" This process transforms raw pain into actionable progress, extracting the data that only a calm mind can perceive. Another reason individuals break in the wake of failure is the trap of comparison. They look at the highlights of others, who appear more successful or confident, and assume their own setback is a permanent state of inferiority. Comparison during a low point is a toxic endeavor, as you are comparing your behind-the-scenes struggles with someone else's carefully curated front-of-house success. Resilient thinkers compare themselves only to their own previous versions, asking if they are learning, refining their process, and improving their approach. If the answer is affirmative, then the failure is fulfilling its purpose as a teacher. Finally, mental strength requires a redefinition of success itself. Most define it solely by the final outcome, which makes any failure feel unbearable. True strength lies in defining success as the integrity of the process and the courage to continue. High-level practitioners of mental fortitude redefine success as the quality of their execution rather than the volatility of their results. They ask themselves the only questions that truly matter. Did I maintain my discipline? Did I act with uncompromising integrity? Was I consistent in my effort? If the answer is affirmative, the external outcome becomes a secondary concern. This shift does not diminish ambition. Instead, it stabilizes it, allowing you to pursue grand objectives without the risk of being emotionally leveled by a setback. Furthermore, a crucial metric of strength is the speed of your emotional recovery. Failure will invariably carry a sting, but the objective is to shorten the interval between the hit and the return to action. Fragile minds engage in endless rumination, reliving their errors until they become paralyzed. Resilient minds set a strict boundary for reflection, extract the necessary data, and immediately re-engage with the world. The experience of failure also serves to highlight the extent of your attachment. The more your ego is intertwined with a specific result, the more devastating a loss becomes. Strong minds practice the art of detaching their identity from their achievements, caring deeply about the caliber of the work while remaining indifferent to external validation. This detachment is the ultimate shield. Additionally, It is a profound truth that the avoidance of failure weakens you far more than the failure itself. Those who play small to circumvent embarrassment or risk-taking build a life of fragility. Conversely, those with mental strength accept that failure is simply the overhead cost of meaningful effort. When it arrives, they do not collapse. They simply adjust their posture without compromising their self-worth. Furthermore, there is immense power in honest self-assessment, which must be distinguished from harsh self-criticism. Admitting a misjudgment or a lack of preparation is not a self-attack, it is an act of radical ownership. Ownership restores your sense of command, whereas blame only serves to dilute your responsibility. Finally, handling a setback requires the gift of perspective. Most failures feel permanent and catastrophic in the immediate moment, yet time has a way of shrinking them until they are insignificant. Resilient thinkers zoom out, recognizing that human progress is inherently uneven and nonlinear. They understand that a setback is not a signal to stop, but a signal to refine their approach. Once failure loses its power to derail you, you are finally free to pursue your true potential without the shackles of fear. Chapter 6: The Liberation from External Validation. The 6th chapter addresses the necessity of terminating the need for external validation, positing that the moment you require approval, you effectively surrender your personal agency. A vast majority of human behavior is subtly driven by a desperate desire to be accepted, praised, or validated. This leads individuals to speak what is popular rather than what is true, and to choose what appears impressive over what is genuinely meaningful. They compromise their values not out of conviction, but out of a paralyzing dread of disapproval. While seeking validation may seem like a harmless source of motivation, it creates a structural weakness in the psyche. When your self-assurance is tethered to the feedback of others, your stability becomes fragile. Praise inflates you unnaturally, criticism wounds you too deeply, and silence breeds a toxic sense of doubt. Strong minds do not exist in a vacuum, nor do they ignore the world. They simply refuse to let the world define their inherent value. This deep-seated need for approval often stems from early conditioning, where we learn that being liked is synonymous with safety and belonging. Over time, we become polished, agreeable, and careful, but our internal compass begins to wither. Reversing this conditioning is a prerequisite for mental strength. The goal is not to cultivate arrogance, but to achieve a state of psychological independence. An independent mind can stand firm in its convictions without becoming isolated. It can listen to external feedback without surrendering its core identity. The undeniable reality is that if you are constantly seeking the green light from others, you can never truly act with freedom. Every decision you make becomes filtered through the exhausting lens of public perception. How will this look? What will they think? Will this cause friction? This constant, background calculation is a massive drain on your cognitive energy and your clarity of purpose. To build a resilient mind, you must learn to validate yourself from within, making choices based on your own principles rather than the shifting winds of social approval. A significant shift in mental fortitude occurs when the internal reference point replaces external feedback. Instead of querying whether others approve, the resilient mind asks, "Do I respect this specific choice?" Internal self-respect is far more durable than fleeting praise. It is a stable construct built through consistent alignment with one's own values. This internal orientation serves as a primary defense against emotional manipulation. When an individual's stability is untethered from the reactions of others, they become difficult to control via the withholding of praise or the application of subtle criticism. To possess the capacity to tolerate disapproval without a psychological collapse is to possess a profound form of power. Cultivating this independence requires becoming comfortable with silence, the void where the urge for validation often creates the most discomfort. While a fragile mind interprets a lack of feedback as a form of rejection, a strong mind views silence as neutral data. Not every effort requires an audience, and not every action demands applause. Reaching a level of maturity where you can function effectively without recognition is a major milestone in psychological development. Furthermore, it is essential to separate feedback from identity. Criticism of your work is merely information, not a final verdict on your worth. Likewise, praise is a pleasant sentiment, but it does not fundamentally elevate your inherent value. Strong minds extract the utility from both and discard the rest, refusing to defend themselves reflexively or internalize external opinions blindly. This path inevitably requires the courage to disappoint others. True mental strength frequently demands choosing what is principled over what is popular. This might involve the firm establishment of boundaries, the refusal of unreasonable expectations, or a complete change in direction that others may not understand. While the fear of causing disappointment can be paralyzing, it rarely results in actual harm. Opinions are fluid, and people eventually adapt. Your personal integrity must always outweigh the temporary comfort of being liked. Parallel to this is the necessity of abandoning social comparison, which ties your self-worth to variables entirely outside of your control. By focusing exclusively on your own standards and competing only with your previous level of discipline, you build a form of confidence that is quiet, stable, and non-performative. One of the most effective strategies for eroding the need for external validation is the habit of keeping small promises to yourself. Whether it is waking up at a designated time, finishing a specific task, or maintaining a training regimen when motivation is low, each kept promise strengthens internal trust. This self-reliance gradually replaces the need for outside reassurance. You no longer require the world to define your identity because your own behavior has already provided the proof. While it is healthy to feel gratitude for recognition or enjoy the warmth of praise, you must never allow yourself to become dependent on them. Attachment to praise is a vulnerability, whereas the ability to receive it without chasing it, and to receive criticism without crumbling, is the hallmark of a steady spirit. This internal steadiness fundamentally alters your social dynamics. You begin to speak with greater honesty and act with more decisiveness, no longer feeling the need to over-explain your choices to gain approval. This is not a sign of indifference, but a sign of being grounded in your own reality. The final realization is that confidence is not a product of validation, but a byproduct of competence. Competence is forged through effort, learning, and repetition, not through applause. When you prioritize becoming capable over being liked, a natural and enduring confidence follows. You cease asking for permission to be who you are, you move, you choose, and you act. Whether the crowd cheers or remains silent, you remain intact. When you stop needing validation, you reclaim total governance over your decisions, your emotions, and your ultimate direction. You are no longer driven by the masses, you are guided by clarity, and clarity is a far more powerful compass than approval will ever be. The 7th chapter explores the necessity of maintaining focus amidst environmental disorder, positing that chaos is not an occasional disruption, but a persistent reality. In a world where notifications, overlapping complications, and constant noise compete for your cognitive resources, the loss of concentration is rarely a result of incapacity. Rather, it is a symptom of being untrained. Most individuals allow external turbulence to dictate the destination of their attention, failing to realize that attention is the ultimate source of power. Where your focus is directed, your energy inevitably follows, and where that energy flows, your life is shaped. When faced with disorder, a fragile mind scatters, attempting to address every stimulus simultaneously and confusing frantic movement with actual progress. Conversely, a resilient mind understands that focus is not about increasing output, but about aggressively protecting what is essential. Internal disorder breeds a false sense of urgency, which in turn fuels distraction and erodes effectiveness. Mental fortitude is defined by the capacity to remain highly selective even when the environment is volatile. The foundational truth of concentration is that while you cannot eliminate the presence of chaos, you can absolutely govern your response to it. Strong minds force a rigorous prioritization by asking one grounding question: what is the single most important objective in this exact moment? They ignore what is loudest or most emotionally charged in favor of what actually advances the mission. This inquiry serves as a scalpel that cuts through the noise, restoring direction to a fragmented mind. Focus is also frequently compromised by emotional hijacking, where stress and anxiety multiply perceived possibilities and fragment concentration. High-level thinkers do not attempt to find clarity through increased speed. Instead, they cultivate it through stillness. When environmental chaos intensifies, the first step is to physically stop moving. By sitting or standing in stillness and consciously slowing your respiration, you interrupt the mental scattering process. Once the body is stabilized, you must simplify the field. Do not attempt to resolve the entire crisis at once, as this will saturate your cognitive capacity. Instead, break the chaos into its smallest components: one task, one decision, one action, understanding that clarity is constructed sequentially rather than all at once. Furthermore, the discipline of focus requires the establishment of strict boundaries. Without these barriers, external noise enters your psyche without resistance. Resilient individuals decide in advance which inputs deserve their energy and intentionally silence the rest. This is not an act of antisocial behavior, but a strategic commitment to clarity. Focus demands the capacity to say no, no to constant availability, no to the demand for instant replies, and no to unnecessary engagement. Every yes you utter carries a hidden cost in attention, whereas every no serves to preserve it. This is a form of strategic restraint that ensures your highest energy is reserved for your highest priorities. A final common error is the conflation of urgency with importance. While chaos serves to amplify the shout of urgent, trivial tasks, true importance often speaks in a whisper. Strong minds resist the emotional pull of the immediate and return to objective priority. This requires a high tolerance for the discomfort of leaving minor tasks unfinished while you complete the one thing that truly matters. To manage the overwhelming feeling of undefined chaos, you must utilize the tool of time containment. By dedicating a specific, limited window, such as 30 minutes of absolute, uncompromised focus, you reduce mental resistance. Within that contained window, multitasking and switching do not exist. Nothing else is allowed to occupy the space of your concentration. This level of concentrated focus is both intense and sustainable. Over time, it functions as a rigorous exercise for your attentional muscles. A primary temptation within chaos is the urge toward constant reactivity, a state where you respond to every stimulus and answer every demand as it surfaces. While this may provide a fleeting sensation of productivity, it yields remarkably little in terms of actual progress. Strong minds master the art of the delayed response. They do not immediately engage with the turbulence but observe it first. This observation creates a necessary psychological separation that restores your sense of command. You must internalize the truth that most demands do not require an instantaneous reply. Focus flourishes only when you consciously decide what deserves your immediate cognitive energy. A frequently overlooked element of sustained concentration is emotional neutrality. High-level focus requires rigorous emotional regulation. If you are emotionally invested in every minor disruption, your focus will inevitably collapse. To maintain clarity, you must lower the emotional intensity of the situation. Treat chaos as a technical problem to be solved rather than a personal attack to be defended against. This mental framing prevents you from dramatizing or catastrophizing the event. Furthermore, resilient minds accept imperfection. They do not wait for a vacuum of silence to begin their work. They learn to focus amidst noise, interruptions, and fatigue, adapting their internal state rather than complaining about the external environment. Focus is not a fragile construct. It is a flexible one that grows stronger through the act of finishing. Chaos creates a powerful temptation to initiate many tasks but complete none, which only serves to increase mental clutter. Strong minds prioritize completion because finishing a task, no matter how small, restores confidence and creates vital momentum. It serves as a grounding mechanism that reminds the brain that progress is possible despite the surrounding disorder. Ultimately, staying focused requires a shift in identity. You must view yourself as a person who consistently protects their attention. This identity drives your behavior, leading you to simplify decisions and resist distractions. While chaos will always exist, it loses its power over an individual who is committed to priority and presence. Chapter 8: The Architecture of Emotional Endurance. The 8th chapter explores the concept of emotional endurance, distinguishing it from short-term intensity. While many individuals can handle high pressure for a brief interval, they often collapse when the strain becomes chronic. This is not a sign of inherent weakness, but of emotional exhaustion. Endurance is the capacity for longevity, the ability to remain stable over a long sequence of demands, setbacks, and recurring stressors without letting the weight distort your behavior or drain your direction. Life is not a single, isolated test, it is a marathon of persistence. Without endurance, you risk burnout, not because the burden itself is impossible, but because you have not yet learned the proper mechanics of carrying it. A significant portion of emotional exhaustion stems from internal resistance, the act of fighting against discomfort, frustration, or reality itself. You squander immense energy by resisting what already exists. Strong minds conserve this energy through the practice of radical acceptance. This does not imply approval of the situation, it simply means acknowledging the facts without adding emotional drama. By describing a situation accurately, "This is difficult, this is uncomfortable, this will take time," you preserve the energy that would otherwise be wasted on self-pity or exaggeration. Additionally, emotional endurance is drained by the habit of overreaction. When minor setbacks are treated as catastrophic emergencies, the psyche is pushed into a state of constant, unsustainable alert. Resilient individuals flatten the emotional curve, refusing to allow every inconvenience to escalate into a full-scale crisis. This is a form of disciplined regulation rather than indifference. You must learn to pace your emotional output, understanding that life requires a sustained, intelligent effort rather than an emotional sprint. Just as an athlete conserves physical energy, a strong mind conserves emotional resources by refusing to overcommit or overexplain. Another hidden drain on your endurance is the persistent noise of internal dialogue, the constant self-criticism, and the endless replaying of past conversations. To build true endurance, you must silence this internal friction and focus your energy on the path forward. Discipline over the inner voice is a cornerstone of this endurance, achieved not through the hollow force of positive thinking, but by the strategic reduction of unnecessary internal commentary. When you cease the constant narration of your hardships, you allow for a silence that accelerates emotional recovery. This internal quietude is bolstered by the establishment of firm emotional boundaries. Without them, you become a sponge for the stressors and volatile moods of those around you. Resilient individuals understand the vital distinction between offering support and becoming destabilized. They recognize that while they can care for others, they are not responsible for carrying the weight of the world. Managing your own internal landscape is your primary obligation, and this clarity is what prevents the onset of emotional overload. Furthermore, emotional endurance is forged through the principle of consistency over intensity. It is built in the quiet, manageable moments, through brief pauses, repeated restraint, and small daily acts of regulation, rather than in the midst of a crisis. Most people wait until they are drowning to practice swimming. The strong mind treats emotional regulation as a daily training regimen. This requires a fundamental shift in expectation. You must stabilize yourself regardless of whether your external life has stabilized. Waiting for the perfect conditions is a form of dependency that erodes power. True endurance is a byproduct of adaptability, not a byproduct of hope. A critical, often neglected aspect of endurance is the art of effective recovery. Endurance does not imply a state of perpetual exertion. It requires restoration that is distinct from mere distraction. Mindless scrolling or escaping into entertainment does not replenish your emotional reserves. It simply delays the necessary work of recovery. Genuine restoration is found in stillness, quality sleep, and physical movement. Resilient minds schedule these periods of recovery with the same discipline they apply to their work, refusing to wait for total exhaustion to force their hand. This process requires radical honesty. Acknowledging that you are fatigued or frustrated releases the internal pressure that suppression creates, allowing you to reset and return to action. Meaning is the final fuel for emotional endurance. When the effort feels purposeful, the load becomes tolerable. During periods of deep fatigue, a strong mind reconnects with its core. Why? Transforming the weight from a burden into an investment. This sense of purpose anchors you when the winds of life are at their most volatile. Ultimately, this endurance becomes an identity. You stop being someone who burns out or needs constant relief and become someone who lasts. This quiet strength reveals itself in the simple act of showing up again, staying steady, and continuing forward when others have faded. In a world characterized by rapid burnout, the ability to last is the ultimate form of power. Chapter 9: Navigating Conflict Without Self-Betrayal. The 9th chapter examines the inevitable reality of conflict, suggesting that the primary challenge is not the disagreement itself, but how you maintain your character within it. Most individuals lose themselves during a confrontation, becoming defensive, aggressive, or someone they barely recognize once the dust has settled. They sacrifice their self-respect and cross their own boundaries in the heat of the moment. Mental fortitude, however, is the ability to face friction without abandoning your values or your clarity. Conflict does not inherently require chaos. It only becomes chaotic when emotions are allowed to seize the steering wheel. While some flee from conflict out of fear and others chase it to exert dominance, the strong mind approaches it as a practical task rather than a personal threat. The most immediate danger in any conflict is the surge of the ego. The ego is obsessed with being right, with dominating the exchange, and with receiving external validation. The moment the ego leads, genuine listening and resolution become impossible. A resilient mind recognizes this impulse and intentionally restrains it, understanding that your worth is not on the line in every disagreement. You are under no obligation to respond to every challenge or prove your value to an opponent. In many cases, a calculated silence is the most powerful move you can make, as it preserves your energy and keeps you in command of the situation. By refusing to engage in the ego's games, you remain intact while others deplete themselves. Another vital competency involves the practice of emotional containment, as friction frequently activates archaic psychological patterns, defensiveness, resentment, or a sense of inadequacy. While these visceral responses surface reflexively, the critical error lies in allowing them to govern your conduct. High-level thinkers acknowledge these internal surges but consciously refuse to amplify them. They lower the intensity of the exchange through deliberate physiological cues, a decelerated speaking pace, a moderated volume, and a composed physical posture. These subtle signals serve to stabilize the nervous system, for it is impossible to de-escalate an external situation while your internal state is escalating. Authentic composure possesses a contagious quality that can shift the energy of an entire room. Furthermore, the integrity of a conflict is maintained through the establishment of firm boundaries. Confrontations often descend into destruction when limits are ambiguous, leading individuals to over-explain their position or offer unnecessary justifications. Resilient minds communicate their boundaries through concise, unambiguous declarations. "I am not prepared to discuss this at this moment," or "This exchange must remain respectful." Boundaries are not subjects for negotiation, they are clearly stated parameters of engagement. Parallel to this is the necessity of avoiding the trap of personalization. In the heat of an argument, the mind tends to invent narratives, assume negative motives, and distort intentions. Strong minds counteract this by anchoring themselves in observable facts, what was actually said and what specific change is required, rather than drifting into the realm of interpretation. Strategic timing is another discipline often overlooked in the pursuit of resolution. Attempting to settle a grievance while emotional charges are at their peak typically exacerbates the problem. Resilient individuals possess the discipline to delay the resolution until internal regulation has been restored, understanding that time provides the necessary distance for perspective to resurface. There is also profound power in the act of disengagement. Not every conflict is worthy of your cognitive energy. Some are designed purely to deplete your resources. Knowing when to walk away is an act of sophisticated self-preservation rather than an admission of weakness. If a dialogue becomes circular, unproductive, or hostile, disengagement is the most effective way to protect your mental health. Your conduct during a disagreement is the ultimate test of your alignment with your personal values. Do you compromise your integrity simply to maintain a hollow peace, or do you adopt an aggressive persona to feel a sense of false strength? A truly strong mind remains consistent, speaking the truth without descending into cruelty, and defending its boundaries without harboring hostility. This balance requires immense practice and a commitment to processing the residue of conflict intentionally. Adrenaline and mental replays must be released through reflection rather than rumination. Instead of rehearsing arguments endlessly, ask yourself what you handled with grace and what requires further refinement. Ultimately, mental fortitude requires a redefinition of what it means to win. Securing a short-term victory at the cost of your self-respect or your integrity is a long-term loss. Real victory is the maintenance of command, clarity, and character throughout the ordeal. Conflict also serves as a diagnostic tool for your internal attachments. If a disagreement feels like an existential threat, it reveals a hidden attachment to being right or a desperate need for approval. By loosening these attachments, you allow for a diversity of perspectives without feeling a threat to your core identity. This level of emotional independence is the very definition of strength. Accountability serves as the final, critical element of this discipline. A strong mind possesses the humility to acknowledge its own contribution to a disagreement without descending into self-flagellation or defensive maneuvers. By stating clearly, "I could have approached that with more care," or "My tone was uncalled for," you actively de-escalate tension. Ownership is a restorative force that builds trust, whereas blame only serves to fuel the fire of conflict. Ultimately, navigating friction without self-betrayal requires a pre-established identity. You must be certain of your values, your limits, and your standards before the confrontation begins. Without this internal anchor, the conflict will reshape you. With it, the conflict merely reveals the strength you have already cultivated. You remain grounded, regardless of the opposition. Disagreements and the testing of boundaries are inevitable aspects of the human experience. Mental fortitude does not eliminate these moments, but it equips you to stand within them without collapsing or becoming a destructive force. When you can navigate a storm while remaining calm, clear, and authentically yourself, you gain an invaluable asset, a deep, unshakable self-respect. This respect is the very bedrock upon which all lasting mental strength is constructed. Chapter 10: The Convergence of Action and Identity. The final chapter emphasizes that psychological resilience is not a singular achievement, but a continuous revelation through repetition. Many individuals experience fleeting moments of discipline or focus, only to see them evaporate when life introduces new pressures. This regression is not a failure of character, but a misunderstanding of how strength is actually forged. Mental fortitude is an identity, and identity is the byproduct of repeated behavior rather than occasional intensity. What you do once is an outlier. What you repeat consistently defines who you are. A common fallacy is waiting for the feeling of strength before acting with strength, waiting for confidence before applying discipline, or for motivation before practicing consistency. This logic is fundamentally inverted. In reality, action creates identity, and that identity eventually sustains future action. You do not wait to become mentally strong to act accordingly. You act with rigorous discipline until that strength becomes your natural state. Initially, this rewiring will feel forced and unnatural. Pausing before reacting may feel effortful, and maintaining composure might feel like an exhausting performance. This resistance is a standard neurological response, as the brain clings to familiar, even if destructive, patterns. Repetition is the only mechanism capable of overriding this internal resistance. Each time you choose the pause over the reaction, you weaken the neural pathways of your old habits. Each time you prioritize discipline over immediate comfort, you reinforce a new, more resilient structure. These moments may appear insignificant in isolation, but they compound quietly over time. The primary risk at this stage is inconsistency, practicing discipline only when the stakes are high or when you are being observed. True identity is shaped in the ordinary, private moments where no recognition is offered. It is not built in the crucible of crisis, it is merely revealed there. Furthermore, a significant transition occurs when you remove the element of internal negotiation. Weak habits survive through constant debate. "I'll skip today," or "I'll make it up tomorrow." A strong identity eliminates these dialogues by making certain actions non-negotiable. The decision to pause, to finish what was started, and to protect your focus is made once and applied always. This eliminates the decision fatigue that often leads to a collapse in willpower. You no longer need to ask yourself if you should act with discipline. You have already decided that this is who you are. This is the ultimate form of mental efficiency, where strength is no longer a choice you make, but the very essence of your existence. A fundamental principle of this final stage is the necessity of patience, for an internal identity is not a construction that appears overnight. You will not feel a sudden, total transformation. Rather, the change occurs beneath the surface of your awareness as the nervous system gradually adapts and the mind rewires itself. Those with genuine mental strength trust this subtle process, committing to the daily ritual of repetition without demanding immediate proof of their progress. Parallel to this is the rejection of perfectionism. Resilience is not built through a series of flawless days, but through unwavering consistency. Missing a single day does not erase your trajectory, only quitting does. A strong identity recovers with speed and without the unnecessary drama of self-attack, simply resuming the discipline as if no interruption occurred. This ability to return is the ultimate expression of power. Your environment also plays a strategic role in reinforcing this new identity. While mental strength is internal, it is a sophisticated tactic to design your surroundings to support your goals. By removing triggers that invite weakness and establishing structures that encourage focus, you conserve your willpower for the moments that truly require it. This is not a form of dependence, but an act of strategic foresight. Furthermore, this identity requires regular alignment checks, simple, honest reflections on whether your actions today match the person you intend to be. This reflection ensures that your repetition becomes a process of refinement rather than a blind, mechanical habit. True strength is inherently quiet. It does not seek validation or announce its arrival. Others will notice the shift in your composure long before you do, simply because you have become consistent. There is a profound freedom in an identity-based strength, as you no longer find yourself at the mercy of your moods or waiting for the perfect motivation. You act with discipline because that is simply who you have become. This internal trust, knowing that you will pause, recover, and continue, creates a calm, durable confidence that does not collapse under external pressure. You remain functional, deliberate, and grounded. Life will continue to present challenges and conflict, but you will no longer revert to a state of chaos. Strength is no longer a tool you reach for, it is the manner in which you live. Over time, the heavy weight of discipline vanishes, and a steady composure becomes your baseline. This is the final transformation. Excellence is no longer an effort, but a fundamental part of your nature. This journey of layers and choices reveals a singular truth. While the world does not become easier and pressure does not evaporate, your capacity to meet them has been fundamentally altered. You have learned that mastery begins with the regulation of your reaction, that tranquility is a practiced skill, and that discomfort is merely a training stimulus. You have seen that emotions can be acknowledged without being obeyed, and that failure is a source of data rather than a verdict on your worth. You understand that focus must be guarded, that endurance is a matter of pacing, and that you can navigate conflict without betrayal of your character. These are not merely inspiring ideas. They are the daily mechanics of a reliable life. There will inevitably be days when you slip and the old habits resurface, but these moments do not negate your progress. True strength is not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to return to the pause, the calm, and the clarity without self-destruction. You are training to become a person who is profoundly reliable to yourself and stable in the face of adversity. This reliability creates a confidence that is independent of external praise. While you cannot govern how the world tests or provokes you, you possess absolute authority over how you show up. By governing your reaction, you protect your personal power. By maintaining composure, you preserve your clarity. By seeking discomfort, you expand your internal capacity. Mental fortitude is not a dramatic performance. It is a dependable way of existing that allows you to face uncertainty without panic and act with intention regardless of the conditions. This is the definition of true freedom, not freedom from the hardships of life, but freedom from the internal chaos that once governed you. Carry these principles as a quiet, consistent practice. In time, you will move through the world with a steadiness that replaces urgency and a discipline that replaces hope. This is not a destination, but a new standard of living where you remain focused and grounded, no matter what comes next.